Hello and welcome to all of you for the latest in the Deckhive Introduces webinar series, where we meet a number of the different creators of the different card decks that are in the Deckhive library. So today we're delighted to be joined once again by Sarah Lewis. So thanks, Sarah, for joining us.
It's a pleasure, as ever.
And so, hello, and so you probably know already, Sarah's got a number of different decks in the Deckhive library. So you may have seen some of those before. In fact, you'll see the recordings of the previous Deckhive Introduces webinars that we've done with Sarah, where we've looked at your organizational development cards and your appreciative inquiry cards.
That's right. Yeah.
And today we're talking about the PRISMM coaching cards, which is a bit of an unusual one because it's probably the first time we've done a session about a deck of cards in the real world isn't a deck of cards.
Yes.
so would you like to explain what the conundrum or the mixture is?
Yeah, definitely.
Backstory is.
Yeah. So as some of you know, I'm a chartered organizational psychologist, and I work with organizations and individuals and teams, and have done for many years. And one of the things I sometimes get involved in is both training coachees and working as a coach. And one of the things I found, particularly when training people in coaching, is that they find it very difficult to frame the kind of question that we're looking for in appreciative or positive coaching. And so I wanted to pull together ideas from appreciative inquiry, positive psychology, and systemic consulting into a coaching model that drew on the strengths of all of those ways of thinking about organizations and people, and how we can create growth and development for people in a positive way. And then I decided, rather than just create a deck of cards, I would create these coaching cubes, which are, I know Rebecca has a set. She was tweeting or something about it recently, which is really nice to see. So there's these very tangible, squeezable coaching cubes that it can be used as a training aid, but also in coaching sessions. And so they have questions on them. The questions are what I think of as content free. So they're kind of generic. Now, it's always difficult because obviously coaching is always context specific, but trying to make them as context and content free as possible so that you can use them in sort of any and many different situations. So they come in a box like this, and there's a little instruction leaflet that comes with them, tells you about the model, tells you different ways you can use them. So they're the what do they call it, the hard reality world, not meat space, it's something else we call it now, the real world. Let's call it the real world, the non-virtual world. But when it came to I
hadn't realized until I saw you at a conference recently that they were so big, because I had in my head kind of normal sort of dice size cubes, but also that they're squishy.
Yeah.
So they do feel they're very light, aren't they? And they are nice to kind of play with.
I don't know if I can do it here, but you can bounce them. I don't think you can see them. I'll show you.
I had a coachee throw them across the room.
You've had people throw them across the room.
A coachee, she took one and she threw it across the room to choose the question. Nobody was harmed.
Thank God for that. But I mean, interestingly, the fact that they're on an external thing, I mean, it may well be the same with coaching cards. When I've run sessions with people, they consistently report back. It makes for a different dynamic between the coach and the coachee, because it's as if the cube is asking the question. So rather than coach and coachee being, I suppose you probably have the requisite sort of 60-degree angle talking to each other, they become partners looking at the question that the cube is asking. So yeah.
Yeah, it does change the dynamic, and that can be really helpful sometimes, can't it? I think the same is true of cards. We've seen the same with question cards that we've used before. It's something about having it kind of written. It makes it somehow more deliberate. I sometimes find that the questions that are presented in that way, and of course it opens up different possibilities, doesn't it? Because you can engage the other person or group in a different way, because they can be actively participating in the choice of question, either by gravitating to one they like, or by randomly or more playfully choosing a question. But that's quite different, isn't it? Because often as a coach, you're very much in control of what question comes next.
Absolutely, and that's something else people have fed back on when they've been using them in a coaching situation, is that strangely enough, it's very liberating for the coach, because they don't have to be thinking about the next question or how to continue or stimulate the conversation. And again, for trainee coaches or novice beginning coaches, I think it's quite difficult to listen really fully and openly to what your coachee is saying without that anxiety about, and when they stop talking, what am I going to say, kind of feeling. And these cubes take that all away, and they also they have the potential to take the conversation in a different direction to that maybe your normal line of work would lead to. Now, whether that's something people feel comfortable with or not depends obviously on individuals. And absolutely, as you're saying, Martin, the versatility is that you can roll all 6 of them and pick a question. You can just roll them in sequence. You can ask your coachee to do any of that. You can ask, you can lay them out and say, okay, given where we are in this conversation, which of these questions looks useful to you? And the important thing to remember, of course, is then as the coach, you need to articulate the question. Don't just let them read it off the cube. You still need to ask them to set up that kind of conversational, they have an audience, you are the audience, you've asked the question, and now you're listening for what they have to say. So
yeah, thank you. And Rebecca's just commented in the chat there to say that she's that her coachee stopped analysing why she was asking a question and appeared to feel more relaxed into whatever question the dice threw up. So then she could follow up with additional questions to explore in greater depth. So that's a nice kind of way of doing it, isn't it? Because you're still actively involved, and as you say, listening very deliberately, and it may then take you in a different direction, but I used to go a bit deeper somehow because of that. So fab. Thank you. So what made you then think, okay, well, let's recreate these cubes in digital form on Deckhive where they're not cubes?
Well, obviously, the biggest driver, as for all of this, has been the last 2 years of everybody being asked to work virtually. And it's a similar thing of how can we expand the possibilities and potential of a conversation, a coaching conversation? How can we break up the dynamic of just 2 people on Zoom, to make it more interactive, to make it a bit more experiential, to make it, just a bit different, create some more engagement. Again, you can give much more agency in the process, because as we will see in a moment, the cards and the questions are kind of physically in the deck. So they get to move them around, they get to choose them, they could make a sequence of them. It depends how much you want to kind of empower your coachee to almost self-coach within the session. And of course, I mean, a lot of this is about the skill and experience and judgment of the coach. I'm sure you've all had the experience. Some people you start to coach and they could almost do it without you. They just need you there for the odd prompt and reflection and kind of, an audience to speak to. Whereas other people really don't know. They've never had any experience of this. They don't know how to engage in the process practically. They're still waiting for you to tell them what they're supposed to be doing, what they've done wrong, and what they're supposed to be doing to put it right, because they know their manager isn't very happy with them or whatever it is. So there's a whole range of people that you get involved in, and dynamics of coaching conversations that you can find yourself in, or at least that's been my experience over the years. So how you use them, I'd love to hear more from Rebecca at some point, who's used them in the wild, about other things that she's learned from working with them that would be helpful to all of us, probably, if that's possible.
Yeah, well, should we do that towards the end? You're here till the end, Rebecca. That would be good.
Yeah, we'll do that at the end. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, so there's still a new tool, aren't there? And you're still kind of getting feedback on people's experience, which is fabulous. One of the joys of creating a new product and getting it out there into the real world. So shall I share my screen so then you can talk us through the structure of the deck as it is in Deckhive, and and the thinking behind that structure?
Okay, so when we switched over to Deckhive, we couldn't really have them as cubes, but we have them as sets of cards, which hopefully you can see down the left-hand side here of Martin's screen. And the PRISMM coaching model goes through these kind of phases or stages. So we start with positive aspects of now, which is really comes from positive psychology, and it's about wanting to create positive affect in the moment to get people into a positive emotional state before, as it were, we go into whatever the challenge or opportunity might be. So these are the kind of questions, absolutely, as Martin is showing. You know, when do you feel most engaged at work? When is work really working for you? When do you feel your best at work? Or what's great about being you? You know, let's just talk about your strengths a little bit and some of what you bring to the world, whatever's going on at the moment. What are some of your talents and strengths and the things that you appreciate about yourself? So we're trying to create, the idea is to create kind of positive affect. And then we move on to relationships and context. And this is about recognizing, and this comes from both appreciative inquiry and systemic consulting, that people are always operating in a context. And that context offers what they call affordances and constraints. So it makes some things easy and some things difficult. And you're in a possibility space, and the possibilities are constrained by the context. And if you move position, then you're in another possibility space, and the constraints and affordances are different. This is quite important because a lot of organizational thinking is kind of predicated on the idea that people have complete agency, that if something didn't work, if something went wrong, or if they've got to do something, they should be able to make it happen. We have a big investment in a story of personal agency in a lot of Western culture. So these questions try to kind of expand our field into who else is affected by this situation, and whose permission are you waiting for? You know, who else is connected to whatever it is that the topic is. Clearly, as with any coaching session, you would start with, I don't know what your two questions are, but mine are something like, what do you want to focus on today? And what are you hoping will be different by the end of our session? So I've got a sense of what the area is we're going to be exploring and the change they're hoping to achieve in our time together. But you've probably got your own opening ones. So this is kind of once you've done that and you're moving in. So now we're looking at, yeah, who else is involved in this situation? And then we want to move on to Illuminating Insights, which is about trying to create some different perspectives, trying to get a shift on how we're thinking about this, bringing some new perspectives into the situation. So what is the question we need to ask here? I really like this one, actually. What is the question we need to ask here? And this is a great one. Coachees often have very unexpected answers to this because they've got a whole wealth of awareness of the context and other things that we don't. And it suddenly, sometimes a light bulb can go off. Yeah, no, what we really need to be asking about here is, and it becomes clear. When was the last time this issue didn't exist? Again, is a question that in different forms is used in different modes of intervention, but can offer a very big shift in perspective as people suddenly, it becomes real that it hasn't always been like this. You know, we are very kind of local beings in some way, and the local reality, how things are feeling at the moment, for me, it's quite easy to lose awareness of the fact that it hasn't always been like that. That other times I've felt different, or things have been different. Or so when was the last time this issue didn't exist is a question I asked with a group who were going through change. They were getting very dissatisfied with their managers, and the kind of story that was developing was as if these managers had had a personality change. You know, now they were complete, I can't find a polite word, but they weren't very pleased with their managers. And so you say, well, have they always been like this? When was the last time your managers were, you know, perfectly nice human beings? Oh, that was before we started doing this. Okay, what did that mean for them in their world? Oh, right, yeah. So how does that link to how you're experiencing them? Oh, yeah. And so you start to construct a different story. So yeah, that's kind of getting a shift in how we're looking at this thing. And then we move on to spotlighting values. And I see this as a very important part of the process because obviously at some point we're going to be looking at things we want to do or what we're hoping the person will do, actions. But if actions aren't connected to the energy of something that's important to us, if they're not connected to our kind of energy of values, they're less likely to happen. There has to be a driving motivation. It has to be meaningful to me, especially if it's going to be difficult to do, for me to want to do it. So let's work out kind of what's important to you so we know where this powerhouse engine is for actually doing something. So a couple of the questions here, you know, what's your secret dream about this? What one change would free your energy for this? What one thing needs to be different for you to really be able to get behind this? You know, what is it that's what's the sticking point? What's holding you back slightly? You're not quite ready to commit to doing something about this. So what do we need to do to change it so that it aligns better and you can release your energy? And what's your secret dream? Any of these kind of questions are usually very revealing of what's important to people, which is another way of talking about their values. So that's what we aim to do next. And then we're looking for motivation and energy. So kind of, you know, why do we want to do this? What's it going to do for us? How are we going to find the energy to do it? Different sorts of questions here. How brave can you let yourself be here? So this is a, you know, brave is a, you know, or how courageous, you could say. Can you let yourself be here? What risks are you willing to take to make something good happen? And obviously, you know, and I'm sure Rebecca would say there are lots of follow-on questions about, because you're now going into a strengths area. If money was no object, what would you do? I think it's a great question because people are very often constrained by their perception of the organizational realities about money, their own sense about, you know, the need to earn money to, you know, support their current lifestyle and so on. And it's just a freeing question that allows you to think in a different way. And from that, we get a sense about what appears to be their real aspirations and what's really important to them. And then we can connect that back into the conversation about how can we make sure that this is somehow addressed, some of these needs are addressed in the way we deal with this or move forward in this particular situation. And then finally, of course, we get to moving to action. So, you know, at some point, we're going to hope that they're going to try and do something different to make something different happen. We're assuming most people come to coaching because they want to change something in some way or other. So what first step will take 5 minutes is again, a very classic question. I'm not saying that these are necessarily highly original. There are sort of some of my own and some that I've almost in the ether these days. Because the first step is often the hardest. So let's start with an easy one. You know, not a number 10, but a number 1 in terms of scale of difficulty. What is something you can do right now, from now, that will start you moving in this different direction? Will start a new pattern unraveling, which is the beginning of the creation of a new story about what this is about. And who will you share this with? Again, it's just a kind of, we all know that any commitment, once we start sharing it with somebody else, it has a different weight and meaning to it. And obviously it depends on the nature of what it is they're thinking of doing and what you've been talking about. There's something about the public sharing it with somebody else that starts to build that sense of reality, realness. This is really possible. This might really happen. So that's broadly the kind of process that I find to be a helpful one to give me and the person the best chance of having, you know, a positively, appreciatively framed coaching conversation directed towards future growth and development.
There's some brilliant questions in there, and like you say, some familiar ones, but still really valuable nonetheless, and others which are a bit different. But yeah, there's some great ones. I can see the value. So do you recommend then taking one question from each category in the cubes form, rolling it in, and then you take one, or would you stick longer with one color and work through all of the questions, or more than one question on that cube before you move on?
Again, I think these are kind of piece of string questions. You know, when I'm working with people who are very new to it, this gives them a frame and a model, and I would go sequentially. I would say, you know, start with the first cube. roll it. You know, if the first question doesn't really seem to produce the shift in mood that you want, then roll it again and use another one, you know. But you know what you're aiming for. You're wanting them to get animated about a good experience and to start feeling better in the moment, and you know, and then go through. But for more experienced coaches, there are lots of different ways that you can use them. So you could spend a whole session on any one of these areas, and there's nothing to say that you can't, as Rebecca was suggesting earlier, follow up, you know, with an answer that's produced by a particular question on a cube, and then when that thread kind of comes to its natural end, it's okay, you know, shall we throw the dice again and see what comes up this time and see where that takes us. So you could certainly spend, you know, a session with each dice. I think we're going to look at in a moment, you know, what you can do when you've got the dice is you can physically roll all 6 dice and just say, here's 6 questions. Which one would you like to address? You know, which one speaks to you at the moment? Which one seems like it might offer us a useful direction to take this conversation?
Yeah.
So yeah.
So we can replicate that sort of playfulness to some extent within Deckhive and using these cards, can't we? So if we look at maybe move on to the second table that we've got here, which is currently empty. But if we open any of these subdecks, as we call them, so we have the positive aspects questions as the first subdeck with the green card. So we've got 6 cards in there. So they're currently all face down. We can click on the flip all.
Well, before you do that, just so you can still pick at random. Oh, sorry, have it open as it was, just with the backs. So you can still, as you can see, you can pick one at random. We don't know what the question will be until we've got it onto the desktop. So
so if I just choose this one here,
so and
then I can do my reveal.
Yes, as it happened when we saw earlier. But or, as you were also going to say, I think you can open them all up and then ask your person, look, we've got some choices here about some questions to open our conversation with. Which one would you like to talk about or speak to? Which one shall we choose for now? And actually, you can have more than one if you want. There are a couple there you'd like to address. So
yeah. So you just drag the card across to the side for the ones we choose.
And remember, of course, that, sorry, going back just a moment. If you just close that, you've got these post-its down here. So you can always, if you want to, you or they could make notes about their response to the question to come back to later, or, you know, to make it a personalized kind of desktop. There's more you can do just with the whole Deckhive application. And then you can always take a photograph of it afterwards to remind yourself what came up in the conversation. So you're co-collaboratively making notes on the conversation in Deckhive, which you can then photograph off afterwards. And that gets past that whole issue of who's record of this conversation are we working by? Because quite often what you think was the highlight of a coaching conversation and what really registered with the coachee are 2 completely different things. So this is a way of just sort of, no one has to write it up. We've co-created it as we've gone, the important things we wanted to remember. I think that's quite nice. It's something you can't do with the cubes. It's an additional kind of feature of having them on Deckhive.
Yeah, so we can save the session. We can then reopen that session later on if we wanted to. And we can either kind of screen share as I'm doing now in this session, or we could invite people in so that they have that choice and control of dragging the cards themselves and flipping them over and so on, which I think is always nice if you can do it that way, because it gives them a sense of control within the discussion. Okay, so we've got the different subdecks. The 6 different options are here, and if we open any of them, we see the color-coded cards, and I think they're all face down at the moment. I can't remember if they always are face down when you start a new session. I think they probably are.
Yeah, I think we designed it that way for the random element. And of course, you could also, as a coach, you could prepare if you wanted. You could set up 6 tabletops with your selected question from each of the phases of the model, or you could put them face down on a tabletop, 1 from each. You know, there's lots of different ways you could play with it as a coach.
Yeah. So you can lay that out beforehand, save it, and then open it up when you're ready to invite somebody in to join you in a session. So it may be, you know, one day we will have a button on here to select a random card for you, but right now, at least,
I think we want them spinning through the air, don't we? Landing,
yeah,
like
maybe. So but at least for now there is a way of doing that and selecting a random card, whether that's you or the client who's doing it. Of course, if it's you doing it, then it's maybe slightly less random than it looks, because you may well know exactly where the card is that you think that you would like to choose at random. Not that you would contrive any of your coaching sessions, of course. So that can be very quickly and easily used in a session. I know we had another layout on table 3, but just another example.
Before we go on to that, what we were talking about was kind of different ways you could use these coaching cubes. And it's worth saying that some people use them for team coaching. So one of the first pieces of feedback I got on the cubes when someone had bought a pack was that they were working with a management team. I guess it must have been 6 people, because they gave each person one of the cubes and said, I don't know how they set it up. They said, basically roll your cube when I ask you to, and we're going to address that question. The story is slightly secondhand because it wasn't actually me that did it, but there was an issue with this team, which was the white elephant, in the room that could not be named. But everybody knew what they were talking about, because these questions are kind of context free. And as they spoke, they got bold enough to really name what the issue was and to really start addressing it and dealing with it. So that was really nice. And I also actually recently I took them to a different context. It was a professionals get together. And again, there were sort of 6 or 8 of us, and I just had the cubes out to show people. People can't keep their hands off them, so they were fiddling with them and say, "Oh, let's just answer one of these questions." So they rolled one of the things. Right, everybody answer this question. So I think it was something like, "What gives you joy, in your life right now?" And so it was just like a fire starter for everybody. Let's just all address this question. That was fun. Let's do another one. So that's one of the ways. Obviously supporting the coaching process from beginning to end, to help someone relax into the process, because it's a bit different, because it's not that intense eye contact. I think I've already mentioned using it for coaching skills development. When you want them to go away and practice coaching, particularly perhaps if you're more interested on them thinking about listening, the rapport or body language that they're setting up, anything other than formulating questions. So they've got this tool, the questions are there, they can concentrate on a different skill and still be able to conduct a conversation.
Yes, that's a great idea. I think because you just take away some of that cognitive load, don't you? Because otherwise you can't disentangle that need to come up with a relevant and insightful question in the right moment, and so then it's much harder to concentrate on what else am I trying to do in this moment. So I think that's a really nice way of achieving that.
Thank you. And I think people who are very new to coaching, there is a lot going on that you're trying to get a grip on. And then other than that, it's really just, I think they're great for when a conversation's got stuck, which happens, when you find yourself in and it happens, maybe it doesn't happen to everybody, but I think it happens to the best of us, that one is trying so hard to be helpful that either you find yourself talking a lot, or you get into a why don't you yes but conversation disguised in certain ways, but essentially that's the conversation, and it's going nowhere, and there's that sort of nothing seems to be working. Well, let's just break the pattern and let's just do something different and ask a random question and set off in a different direction. So I think they're quite good for that as well. But we were going to go on. Yes, we're going to have a look at another way of using them, which is possibly self-coaching. So when you have something on your mind and you just want to spend 20 minutes working out what is going on here. And so the example we picked on was you've got something coming up, whether it's a coaching session or a team development session or whatever your line of work is, and there's something bugging you about it. Something at the back of your head making you anxious. So you haven't really had the time, because you're rushing through life, to quite put your finger on what it is that's bothering you. So the question is, and this may not be how you would frame it, but why is this on my mind? Why is this worrying me so much? Why am I feeling not quite right about this? So these were the questions that came up when we were just preparing this. Who has a different story about this? The client. She has no worries at all. She thinks it's going to be a great success. If I spoke to her, she wouldn't understand why I had reservations. So it's something I'm aware of that she's not. Okay. What one change would free my energy for this? That's very important because my energy is feeling blocked. That's the whole point. I'm not entirely convinced that people know what they're coming into. I'm not entirely convinced that people have been briefed the way I would like them to be. I think I'm going to have to get a bit more proactive about this. I'm going to have to take this ball by the horn and go back and to this client and say, look, we need to do a pre-briefing because this is going to be very different. And if people come unprepared, we're going to lose a lot of time at the beginning, kind of explaining what we're doing. And I want to give people a chance to get oriented before we go into the event, which is a fairly classic sort of thing, because often from the client's point of view, it's, I've booked you to do this thing. I'm really excited about it. I understand something about it. We've talked about it a lot. Everybody else will just come along and you'll just turn up and deliver. And so breaking that story can take a little bit of energy and thought sometimes. So that's what we were thinking. So I need to prepare, ensure everyone was prepared in advance, so I can either get to talk to them or I can record a video briefing, but I need to do something proactive to help me feel reassured that I'm going to walk into a room where we're ready to go. So that was just a kind of example of how you might use it to just untangle something for yourself for, 5 or 10 minutes. Needn't take very long, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, and of course, that's additional benefit really of having a Deckhive subscription, is that you can use any of these decks of cards to do that self-coaching, to have a little session for yourself, to capture some reflections on sticky notes, to do some planning for a session that you've got coming up. So it would encourage you to think about using it for your own benefit as well as for the people that you're supporting in whichever way that might be. And was there any other examples that you want to talk through now, or is now a good time to ask Rebecca to share what else?
Yeah, no, I think that's probably most of what I was hoping we could kind of alert people to in terms of the potential of the the structure, potential, and possible uses of the decks. Yeah.
Thank you.
So questions or Rebecca? Yeah.
Well, while we think about picking Rebecca's brains, if anyone else has a question that you'd like to ask Sarah about the cubes or about the digital deck version of the cubes, then feel free to formulate your question, put it into the chat, or just unmute in a moment and ask away. But Rebecca, have you got other examples of how you've used the cubes in the physical world that would be helpful to share, do you think?
Yeah, there was one variation that I've done on what you talked about. And funnily enough, I was doing a test run yesterday with the online version of them. And I'm pleased to hear that I was using them in the way that you've recommended. So we did everything you said. So initially, this with my guinea pig, it wasn't a real coachee. It's another coach. Initially, we turned over the green ones and she just pulled the card across and then randomly turned it over. And it gave her what gives you joy. So that was great. That was our kind of kickoff. But she also put her coaching question, a bit like you put the self coaching one. She put her question on a post-it note at the top of the session. And then on the next one, the blue one, she turned all the questions over and selected one and then moved that across. So she did all those so it's good to hear that's kind of a good way of using it. When in person, I've got a coachee who is quite kinesthetic, and if I'm not careful with my questions, clams up quite quickly, but loves cards and things like this. I'd used some strengths cards really early on and really liked the tactile nature of it. And I'd done something like we'd done a systems map with them and she really liked it. So she saw the coaching dice and said, oh, can we use those today? She likes the tool sometimes. So we were coaching, and then we got to this point where I thought, I think it's quite relevant now for this tool to come in, because she's in this kind of creative mode she needed to be creative. She needed some prompts around being creative around her solutions. So we actually started with I said, let's pick I was just looking for my notes, orange. So I had the orange and the pink and the purple. So we've got the insights, the motivation, and oh no, what's this on there? What's that one?
We had to change the pink because
I was going to say that's a different colour, isn't it?
To the red, so it's probably the orange one. I think we changed it to.
Yeah,
yellow, is it?
Yeah. So we've got shifts in perspective. The third one.
Yeah.
The illuminating ideas. So the fourth one. Is that the fourth one?
Spotlighting is the fourth one. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and then the movement.
Yeah, because the pink was too similar to the red. That was
so we picked the three in the middle, because we usually do action planning at the end anyway. So it felt that would facilitate quite a creative space. Initially, she rolled all three across the table, and half of them, two of them dropped on the floor, and then she just picked it up and started using the questions quite randomly. We did stick with which. She naturally was drawn to one of them and stuck with the questions on one of those. They were just helping her be creative. And then one of them, she kind of rolled it. She kind of went to roll it and then threw it across the room, and it hit the wall. And then she picked it up off the floor and used that question as though it was some kind of serendipity moment. I went, oh, that really gives me some thoughts around things. So what I found quite interesting was that was the movement angle to it. So that's what I've been trying to kind of recreate that in an online session. And I think something about her, especially being kinesthetic in how she processes things, that the movement helped her with creativity. So that's kind of where it was quite interesting to see. So that's mainly where I've used them, and then just use them in the more traditional order as well with another coachee. But that was the one that was a bit off the wall. And then yesterday was just trying to get my head around how to use it online, and the randomness, how you can bring the random aspect. Because certainly with that coaching, not yesterday, but the one I did in person, she's often saying, oh, why are you asking that question? That's really interesting. Or she kind of gives me an answer thinking, oh, you want to know about this? She's expecting a leading question when it's an open question. So she sits there analysing it. And I found it completely broke that thinking cycle when we were using the dice, which meant I could ask lots of open follow-up questions, but she didn't feel, not that the question was leading, but it's almost kind of, it felt even more non-judgmental to her. So
she's trying to be helpful by giving you what you're after.
Well, that's
the issue we're exploring. I don't know what you mean. I don't know the sort of person you mean. It's almost over engagement in the process, isn't it? Rather than just being selfish enough to talk about whatever is.
She's got a tendency to get stuck in the story as well. And if I'm not careful, I can get drawn in quite quickly because she's a great storyteller. So the other thing I found was this enabled us not to get too stuck in the story. Because actually I don't really need all the detail of the story. So
absolutely.
No, thank you for sharing that. It's really, really good to hear. It's really useful, especially given we didn't give you any warning about asking you to share your examples of how you've used the cubes. So thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Rebecca. Very useful.
So were there any other questions that have come to mind for anyone else who's here? It's fine if there aren't. I know we've covered a fair bit.
I guess I do have one question, which was kind of where I thought, oh, come on and just explore. So was where you were talking about you could pre-select questions, because I want to be able to use this very much in the moment. That's how a lot of my tools, it's just like, oh, this seems to be a good tool that we could use in this moment. But actually, in terms of the team coaching, I actually think some pre-planning might be helpful. And I'm just wondering how I can make sure it's still very open and I'm not trying to bring my judgment and preempt what they want to talk about. Whether, how you could keep that an open piece. I mean, would it be putting, like you had earlier, the two questions on the table and saying, do you want to stick with these questions or do you want to mix, like you do with poker. You put 2 cards down. Do you want to stick with those questions? Do you want to mix one of them out or swap one of them out? I'm just wondering if you do something like that, or whether you've ever done anything like that, Sarah.
Looks like someone's got an idea up here. I can see a hand up. Is this relevant to this question? Sorry, Lisa. Is it relevant?
No, it's a separate question. Sorry.
Oh, a separate question. Okay. Yeah, no, I think there's probably different ways you could do it, Rebecca. In terms of, you could have all the each set of cards out on a different tabletop, and assign each team member a different tabletop, and give them a chance to have a pre-look at their questions, and kind of say, and pick the one that they think will be most useful to the team, so they've got some sort of agency in it that way. Because I think trying to get all 6 of them to agree on which question they want to answer from the set might not be, well, it'd be an interesting exercise in its own right.
So in that sense, I've got 3 people I'm thinking of I could work with on this. So I could give them I could actually give them a blank desktop.
Yeah.
We've usually pre-agreed roughly what the topic's going to be, so I could pop that in a post-it note, I guess, and then I could say, right, your desktop number 2, select a question from either the green or the blue that you think is the question we should be exploring today. Do you mean something like that?
Yeah, or it would be useful for us to explore today.
Oh yeah, because I'm just thinking what you could do then is you don't need agreement. You can just work around the 3 questions that the team have selected individually, and then everyone has an equal say in the agenda of what you're covering when you're team coaching. But I've not thought of that. That's a good idea.
Okay, good.
And the other thing is that sometimes seeing these questions helps you to realize the question that you want to ask is not one of these, but something else, doesn't it? So adding your own question onto a sticky note, I think, is also a valid way of using it sometimes.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
For the people who don't like following rules like me, who say, well, I don't want one of these, I want a different one.
But it's been triggered by seeing these. I think
exactly,
the question I actually want, I guess it's, out of these questions, which of them would you be most interested to hear what other people in the team have to say? That's what you're looking for, isn't it? Which of these do I think is going to stimulate an interesting and new conversation for us? Yeah,
nice. Thank you. Good question. So Lisa, what's your question?
Hi, yeah. So I'm doing MAP CP at the moment, and I was sort of mentioned earlier about being able to use these in a group or the dice, the sort of the PRISMM sort of model in the dice in a group setting. And that's kind of got me wondering if there's been, if you've had challenges using it in group settings, the sort of critical analysis of that in such a situation at all.
I do find this. The hardest group to use them with in a way is in a training session with experienced coaches. Because you're saying you've got 40 minutes, to run through this model using these cubes, to get a sense of how these, what I'm interested in is them getting a sense of how the questions work. What unexpected information do you get when you ask these questions? But they get completely frustrated because they can't spend the first 20 minutes establishing rapport and all the things they would kind of normally do. They're being unskilled by the process of being told just use these questions. But other groups, they're the only ones I get pushback from, which is kind of, it felt really bumpy, I wouldn't usually do it like this kind of thing, which is absolutely fair enough. But everybody else, any other group, no, the feedback has always been, wow, this is a bit different. This is interesting. Yeah, that was a useful conversation. People just love the tactility of them, I have to say. And you see coach and coachee handing them back and forth to each other, sort of almost like a talking stick, about who's holding the question and who's talking at the moment. And and then they have them lined up in front of them, and it's kind of, okay, shall we pick up another one now? Have we finished with that one? We'll put that one over there. So I've not found any difficulty with it. Yeah.
Just make sure you have hand sanitizer with you before the group start throwing them around the room.
Thank you.
So people, the whole fact, I mean, the fact that you can throw them all at once, I mean, they do bounce off the table, they do go everywhere. And of course, that introduces another element of, as Rebecca was saying, sort of playfulness or humor. So as always, it's a case of kind of being situationally sensitive, you know, how I want to offer something a little bit different to this group, but not so different that they think I'm completely bonkers. So where is that space where it's different enough to be interesting, but not so different that you're going to be rejected? And that's a judgment only you can make in context.
Excellent. Well, I guess that brings us to the end then. So thank you, Sarah. It's really, really good to hear about the cubes and now digital card decks, and the background and some ways to use them. I guess new creative ways will emerge as people start to find different ways of throwing them and catching them and spinning them or whatever else you might be able to do.
I'd be very interested to hear as we go forward. If people, I haven't had a chance to use them digitally yet, so if people do, you know, any feedback or stories would be much appreciated of how you've found them. But yeah. Thank you everybody. It's been very stimulating for me too. It's been a great session.
And we should mention before we finish, as many people will already realise, that Deckhive has a number of different card decks in the library. So the PRISMM coaching cards are one of them, which we can see in the library. I've just gone straight past them, I think.
Yeah, just shot past them. There they are. Oh.
But also, we have your other decks that we mentioned earlier, the Positive Organisational Development and Appreciative Inquiry cards, and the PRISMM one's just right next to it. But we also have a brand new one, which you just added to the library, which is at the bottom here. Tell your story. Do you want to give us a couple of lines about what that is? And then we'll do a separate session about that, hopefully in a few weeks or months' time, but to give people a bit of a teaser as to what that's about and for.
Yeah, it's a set of non-text cards. There are no words on the cards, so you can use them in any language. You can use them with people who are non-verbal. The idea is that they're really, really versatile in that sense. And there's a series of images. You can see some of them here, both positive images and more difficult images. So different life events. I think there's a picture of a gravestone, for instance, so that people can talk about significant bereavements and that kind of thing, so that you can use them to cover the whole of people's life events. They're selected to be good for metaphor, so that if you can't find the exact image, you can find something that's a metaphorical representation of what it is you want to be talking about. And then we have these signs and symbols and emojis to add causality. So this happened plus this, which equaled me feeling like that, kind of, you could lay out. And somebody else was completely astonished, hence the exclamation. So it just adds a sort of while they contain emotionality in themselves, it just adds another layer of being able to tell the emotional story as well as the kind of chronological event of what went on. So you can certainly use them in coaching, but I think there are probably other contexts. You could use them in the dream stage and appreciative inquiry when you want people to be telling a story about the future, but any kind of story really. And I just tried to give a really good range of images, and as I say, these extra symbols and emojis to add a bit of something extra. And there are no words, so they can mean whatever you want them to mean.
Thank you. So you've obviously been very busy creating all these new tools, which is brilliant, and they look fantastic. So we'll leave you to have a play with that in your own time. If you haven't already tried using Deckhive, then please do take up the free 30-day trial that we have available, which gives you access to all the decks in the library and gives you unlimited use of the system during that period. So you can have a proper play and a practice, try running sessions and bringing friends, family, colleagues into that session so you can get used to the system and how it works. and explore the library to see which decks you'll find most useful going forwards. So we hope that's a good introduction to the PRISMM coaching cards. And if you want to see more about Sarah's other decks or any of the other decks that we've covered in our earlier webinars in this series, then please do take a look at our YouTube channel. You'll find all those recordings there. And we'll get this recording sorted as soon as we can and circulated back out to you. So if you missed any bits or want to replay any of it, then you can easily do that. And if you want to join us for any future sessions, then please do look out for our Eventbrite page, or look out for the emails we'll send out about future sessions. We'd love to see you again at one of those. But thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, thanks everybody. We really appreciate you coming along.